key premises that is underlying a specific approach that we have under development at SINTEF concerning resilience and compliance. Okay, so the basic motivation for this workshop is the observation that in most scientific as well as other more practical parts of safety resilience is often portrayed as a contrast to compliance or safety by rule. And they are often explicitly or implicitly positioned as kind of counterparts, as being mutually exclusive. But seen from our more practical application related to, for instance, the petroleum industry, the offshore industry in Norway, it cannot be an either or. We cannot say you have to choose compliance or resilience exclusively. And resilience research as such can not escape the fact that safety by rule is prevalent, is so to say institutionalized all the way from law, from the heaven, so to say, down to the expectations of each person facing risky conditions. We'll come back to what that means. And that is not void of reason, not void of some reason. In many circumstances, there are very good reasons to build safety by compliance. So the challenge of achieving being resilience can therefore be kind of paraphrased into a challenge of coexistence between compliance and resilience. A more practical challenge. And this coexistence, of course, has some challenges itself. Taking a resilience or resilience engineering point of view, this challenge is increased or strengthened when information technology is deployed with the purpose of increasing scope and reach of managerial control. We have a very concrete example in the offshore petroleum industry, what we call integrated operations. You need to look at it. You will listen to what is said. You will hear more of a compliance and urge for compliance, for more control, than you will hear an urge for resilience. And to be putting it at the edge, I will say that there's a kind of urge for hyper-tailorization or hyper-bureaucratization that is not unusual. And that is very well fit to the urge of compliance and the safety by rule thinking. So that should be a bit disturbing, seen from a resilience point of view. The deployment of these ICT infrastructures is kind of destined to get better, faster, cheaper decisions with more reach, with more grasp, and increasing the scope of control from the top. At least that is how it seems sometimes. And therefore, those of us have some aspirations on behalf of resilience should not be content, so to say, with kind of residing in shadows of compliance, or just come to rescue this, what I call the rational facade from time to time. Because resilience, because adaptation is needed. That is, for me, the starting point of departure. So the workshop was thought as follows. As intended to investigate the relation between compliance and resilience, not only the relation, but we're putting on the dialectical relation in terms of a kind of ongoing difference in terms of approaches and goals. And with the underlying presumption that this conflict, this dialectical relation will be productive for both sides. And this contrast then that I have, so to say, used now in the introduction between a kind of strict compliance at the one side and very utter resilience on the other side, that is maybe a kind of rhetorical trick, so to say, a contrast fluid in order to spot the differences. But in practice, the key premise will be that these practices are infiltrated in each other. It can be hard to spot what kind of practice is. Is it a manifestation of resilience, or is it a manifestation of compliance? That it will not always be easy to grasp. show is to kind of position resilience in relation to compliance. Where is it? What chances does it have in relation to compliance and other rule-based approaches? But I think the notion of compliance here catches the most of it. So, although, as I said, I expect that these practices are infiltrated in each other at a very practical level. Nevertheless, we should aim for some kind of holistic interpretation of what resilience is. That is, that resilience comprises both human, ecological, and organizational issues at one go. So this notion of infiltration is not to kind of jeopardize the whole concept of resilience. It's an attempt of having two thoughts in the head at the same time, as someone says. And a related goal then is to identify the conditions for resilience to develop and unfold from these contextual shadows of compliance. That's a term which I will come back to. And also then to identify the trade-offs to be made in this shadow. By the contextual shadow of compliance, I mean a shadow that is a kind of, in the sense that compliance is the operational context for the exertion or resilience, that relate to compliance in terms of rules. And as such, compliance is also then contributing to the condition of the actual margin of maneuver in the system. It's a kind of part of setting those margins. But it also a point that compliance may be potentially overshadowing the merits of resilience. So it's a kind of invitation to attribution failure both ways. And it seems, as I will come back to, that compliance always gets a second chance, at least in the Norwegian public and in media. If there's something, an accident or incident coming up, and the media puts a microphone forth and the cameras forth, and somebody being asked and answered, we will look after and go through our routines. Then there is literally no more to question about. Then you are at the end stage, because that is the answer that is sought. We will look through our routines. But if you try to kind of explain that this is actually complex, conditional and so on, then you are on the hook in the meeting. So some key issues here are, for instance, that I choose to see resilience as a kind of exponent for what Carl White calls safety as a dynamic non-event. That is, resilience is an exponent of a kind of elusive safety that is hard to grasp and hard to catch. That is going on behind a kind of rational facade of an organization that seems permanent and solid, but it actually may be as impermanent as Carl White also is pointing out. Who is the possessor of resilience? Is it the master designer or the leaders and so on? Well, I think it's maybe somebody else. It might be kind of communities of practice rather than individuals or the formal organizational bodies. They may be the actual possessors or campaigners of these adaptive practices. So this is a kind of hint of where to look. So resilience is potentially then a kind of tacit part of organizational life that we usually don't notice. And I guess you might all know this theory W versus theory Z contrast that Erik has drawn up. Theory format, theory W is compliance, safety by rules. Ascribing success, ascribing safety to the fact that people are following rules. While theory Z is ascribing safety to the fact that people are adapting to circumstances, are being adapted. Almost a kind of dichotomy in terms of explaining why a system may remain safe. But it is a possibility here that theory Z is not important only as an individual or self-contained contributor to resilience and safety. It might also function to kind of maintain the impression that theory W is actually doing the safety. So to say, rescuing from time to time. That is also an attempt to see that these things are maybe infiltrated in each other. And it's a useful contrast to say either theory W safety 1 or theory safety 2, but they may actually be inflicted in each other in a way that is not easy to see. More key issues. The implication of what I now said is that theory W safety 1 is regarded as a kind of manifestation of this rational facade of organization, but also, in that sense, constituting a context, the operational context for resilience. But theory W is more than a competing theory, is that? I will use the more sociological term of a deep structure for safety theory and practice, because we find it as something taken for granted in theory and practice at all levels in society. It is always the default you choose. Therefore, it is, can be described as a deep structure. And more even, that it's institutionalized, but it's kind of written into laws and regulations at the top, all the way down to the expectations of each person at the workplace facing dangerous conditions. That might vary across industries, of course, but that is the experience that at least I have in working with the oil industry, that people are, and they are questioning where are the procedures. Give me a procedure, otherwise I feel uneasy. So people are not going around and so to say longing for resilience all the time. They are looking for rules. And despite that theory set, resilient is rational on its own terms. It's a perfectly good theory for why things go right, and it's not without practical merit either. But it is not on par with common sense. We have to kind of take that into account. And although compliance, now I'm talking about compliance in a very strict sense. The term compliance may, so to say, encompass a broader meaning. Maybe about adaptive rules and rules management and so on, but it's still with the rules-centric. It's about the rules. So it's still the incarnation of these deep structures and this institutionalization. I'm soon finished with the key issues, but I have some more. As I mentioned, is that why in theory compliance is always a granted a second chance? And not only in terms of pointing at the routines, but often in terms of very airy managerial formalisms that actually often have no substance. We will go into culture, we will look at leadership, we will look at everything, more of the same. We always get a chance to say more of the same. You can invoke, so to say, any diffuse managerial concept that you like. And you cannot question. Mats Olsson, Swedish, wrote a book in 2011 in which he called it in Swedish. It's called The Triumph of Emptiness, then translated to English. And he's talking about grandiosity, absolution, zero-sum games, as a kind of all these managerial practices that actually have no substance, just so to say floats on the top, and all the time is referring to and justified by compliance to rules. You must have rules. See how fine rules I have created. And one of the problems for, not with theory set resilience, but for, is that while its validity may seem intuitively promising, when we tell stories and these histories and narratives about patients, people recognize it, they see the parallel. But when you try to turn it into something that can be repeated, made instrumental, then we have a big problem, because we cannot make it as instrumental as a rule. We cannot repeat it. Routinize resilience. That's a contradiction in terms. So therefore, in terms of more scientific, traditional scientific terms, the validity is okay, but the reliability is more dubious. And therefore, we have some problems in getting the second step, saying, okay, let's just proceed with resilience. But this, in my opinion, says more about the safety science as of today than it says about resilience. we have to acknowledge also then that rules play a more complex role than they think in the first place. Rules are kind of acting in a game that goes outside their own confines. They have effects outside the strict confines of the rule itself. Okay, is there any comment to this? Am I clear? Is my message clear, so to say, or something confusing?
I understand you as theory W is looking to sort of base knowledge in the organization, where one theory is that.
Yeah. That's the position I'm trying to place it in. Could have been said as simple as that, yes. Yes?
Your understanding about compliance is just legal compliance, or?
Excuse me?
Your definition of compliance, is that just in quotation of just legal compliance, stick to the rule and written in the law?
Yeah,
Is that your point of departure?
Well, my point of departure, and that's the kind of stereotype I'm using. But
Because we get convenient what you mean on compliance.
Yeah.
Because compliance
yes.
and
And I said now, just at the end, that I think that is the kind of contrast that makes my point. Then I know there is something in between. But very often, what is between all this flexibility around the rules, they are still rule-centric. They are about adapting the rule. They do not go beyond the rule. Is there something else behind the rule that is kind of ruled out? Use that.
What uses the difference between decision making and sensing?
Yeah.
Decision making.
Yeah, I'm coming into a system. Yeah. You know?
Do you have a talking about reliability, and I was thinking that perhaps we have reliability engineering and we have resilience engineering. Reliability can decompose systems and analyze, and but the resilience engineering is looking more into the flexibility and other things that we
I was here. I mean, the scientific methodological terms of validity and reliability, or in terms of that you can repeat the action and get the same result. That was okay.
This theory W doesn't give people also a certain way of security, safety, and theory Z is giving people a feeling of unsafety. So
Yeah.
why it's also
Yeah, because the theory of the rules, safety by rules, is kind of
gives people
being associated with more trust, with more reassurance of all the other rules. That is what I mean by the deep structure and by being institutionalized. That is what we expect at all levels. So it has a kind of prevalence, it has a kind of edge or predominance related to resilience. And therefore I use this term, the rational facade, which is not only a facade, it is functional. But in many circumstances it's not, but there's something behind it. And there's a shadow from that facade in which resilience has to, so to say, live.
and it's very established in the industry also. The oil and gas industry in Norway is very established rule.
Yeah. At least I'm not at least the expectation that rule is the way, so to say. But now I'm talking also in general terms. There will be, of course, variations across the context and so on. Okay, what I'm now taking up is actually drawing from experience from the nuclear industry. And nuclear industry is known as the kind of hallmark of strict compliance, but it's not only that. Somebody say, I'm not an expert, I just read books on the nuclear industry. But I'm taking into account that. So Perrin wrote in 2006 a review book, which is called Shouldering Risk, Cultures of Control in the Nuclear Industry. Something here and there. She's arguing that following rules also means when to break them. Not whether to break them, but when you have to break them. That's an inevitable implication. And that decision on when and how to break the rules is a foldable practice, a foldable decision. You cannot escape it. And Perrin argues that very much try to straddle this, both follow the rule and break the rule in a professional way. If you straddle in a professional way, then you say, well, it's not show, for sure. That does not resolve the basic challenge, shareholders. And should also put forward the view that a procedure rule controls the person, not the process. Yet the task may have to be done when conditions change. And therefore, theory W and theory Z, they actually address different phenomena. They are not addressing the same, they are not competing for the same truth. They are complementary. They complement each other. They are not competing theories. But still, we may argue that the rational facade is, so to say, mainly aimed at controlling the persons, while the persons are, so to say, left to themselves when it comes to breaking the rules and do something behind the facade. Okay, this is the premises that I kind of have used in order to approach this discussion of resilient compliance. And as you have noticed, I kind of pushing it a bit in order to make the argument, to make the contrast, and to make it possible. We have been working with are working with an approach that we call the resilience in context approach, and method with equal working name on it. And what I'm telling you now is a sort of preview of a paper that will be presented at the SINTEF conference this fall in Olav, presenting this method. This method aims to sensitize the discovery and development of resilience in the grounds of the RZ from these contextual shadows of the predominant compliance that is the result. And the term sensitization here is about becoming aware of. That is a term that is derived from sense-making perspective and from inductive thinking, contextual thinking, reasoning. Also actually forwarded, promoted by Gonzalez. So the aim is to say, okay, we have a practice here that looks like compliance, safety by rules, but try to sensitize the practitioners and the researchers so that there might be something else with that same practice. It's the kind of rudimentary resilience that could be developed into something more. So it's a kind of prospect of maybe giving resilience a place in the sun. It's intended to be a vehicle for a pragmatic process, while at the same time it's quite concerned about maintaining this dialectical premises, which is actually means distance in order to generate further insight and deeper elaborations. And the premise for that statement is that dialectics needs a kind of distance in order to function. If you try to kind of align the two opposing viewpoints too much, then the whole process breaks down. So dialectics kind of demands a kind of spark, a kind of ignition, a kind of indifference in use. So that must be maintained. Therefore, I'm not saying that compliance is better than resilience or vice versa. Here's the dialectical relation. That's maybe productive for safety. It is, then we use the metaphor here for hunting low. Are you hunters? Well, I hunt for birds. They are sometimes low, they are sometimes high. So you have to hunt high and low. Hunting low here is, so to say, while acknowledging this situated perspective or resilient practices that are infiltrated in compliance, we have to be able to sort out, is there something here that is called resilience that is going on, that we could have developed into something more? While hunting high is to kind of elaborate those practices, to see the implications at the managerial and organizational levels that support these practices and represent the potential kind of growing in more. While the combination hunting high and low, and I guess you understand from where I have nicked this title, it's Norwegian rock group. I hope there's no copyright in using it that way. Which means the continuous pending between high and low co-instituting the search for a functional reconciliation between compliance and resilience, a conciliation that should not push the ambitions for resilience too far, because it's straightforward dangerous if a management or organization try to impose the expectation of being resilient to a further degree than the actual organization is capable of. Because resilience is also a forward practice. You should not push an organization that is not capable of being resilient into resilience. That's part of the safety management decision. If this latter point is not maintained, resilience may turn out to be more dangerous and risky than that should also be kept in mind. So this step number 1 here is not about hunting high and low directly, it's about the kind of setting up a kind of initial positioning of what do we expect from compliance and what do we expect from resilience. And this is not a normative model, it just indicates a possibility, saying that if we use Rasmussen's theory of borders of acceptable load, say that we might use compliance approach in order to define a kind of standard operating procedure that we know that we're quite sure is safe. But at the same time, that we maintain a margin of maneuver, so to say, within this extended safety space that is kind of allowed in certain circumstances in order to be to keep safe up there at the more lower level. But as also indicated that there is an inherent possibility of inherent failure in so to say acknowledge and accept resilience as a part of your safety strategy. This is a kind of a way of kind of indicating a starting point. What do we want with resilience? What is the objective with resilience and from safety point of view? The second step is about hunting high. On the left side here, I hope you can recognize a very simplified version of Reason's model of organizational excellence, saying that I have cut out these latent factors and so on. The essence is that unsafe acts that may jeopardize safety, they are not unsafe acts only, they are also a result of workplace conditioning, which is also a result of organizational factors. Of course, not all organizational factors, not all workplace factors, not all acts are contribute to, but this is the kind of the constituency in depth of an accident in Reason's term. When he calls these organizational factors, he calls them pathogens. And that is used very much in the safety literature, pathogens, pathogenic factors and so on. It's very clear that almost, now I'm pushing the argument again, but I would say that almost the whole traditional safety literature is based on a medical metaphor of disease. We are thinking that an accident is a manifestation of a disease, and we are thinking in terms of pathogenic factors that may actually create that disease. Pathogens in medicine are disease-creating factors. And we use them, we call them risk-influencing factors, or pathogenic factors, or pathogens, and so on. But this is the prevalent way of thinking safety. The organization is not, well, it is maybe it's ill, but it's creating the illness. We're treating safety as a kind of disease treatment. So I say, when we're talking about resilience, which then is about maximizing the number of successful adaptations. That is something more than just merely removing the unsafe acts. It's about being proactive, about seeing things beforehand and acting proactively. But if you want to enforce successful adaptations, if you want to facilitate that, you should also think in the same terms, in terms of how does the workplace influence that kind of resilience, these acts? How is the organizational influencing the same acts? So if you establish a kind of parallelity here between those, we can say that while we, at this side, at the double is saying we are avoiding a disease a disease-creating process. Here we are thinking about a health-creating process. And it has this counterpart metaphorically in medicine, because a guy called Antonovsky coined this opposite of pathogenesis. They call it salutogenesis in medical terms. What is creating health in the human body? And doctors say, we know nothing about health. We know just something about the disease and how to avoid the disease. But what creates health, we know nothing about. By the way, last summer, in Trondheim, there was actually a big conference in Trondheim, a medical conference on salutogenesis. So the issue is coming. But I'm not talking about the human body, I'm talking about metaphors. I'm just saying that if you want to take resilience a bit far, we might say that resilience goes beyond the mere absence of error. It's more than the absence of failure. It's about creating healthy conditions for the organization to be able to stay healthy. Beyond avoiding the disease. So it's a way of putting a more ambition into resilience. So this also creates a kind of dialectic between organization as a kind of solid structure, a kind of durable structure versus organizing, which is an activity, between knowledge, skills and knowledging, understanding, between perception, cognition, and interpretation and sense making. That's different activities, different kind of hallmarks for these two activities. Anybody get feeling sick? Okay, well, we're sitting. The third step is to look into something low, looking into the intersection between compliance and resilience, being sensitized to it. Yvonne, you look shocked.
It's Norwegian.
Yeah. I was hoping we would have contrast. It is, but it's only this one. I have time to translate it. This is safety by compliance, and safety through resilience. It's the same. You recognize the colors. Okay. So this guy has his head partly in the contextual shell, so to say. He's part of rational. Suddenly he wants to investigate what's going on inside. You can make many approaches to this. But one approach is to try to kind of divide this space of intersections into some categories. For instance, ranging from standard operating procedure from error avoidance, error management, and adaptation to surprise. And we can try to single out some issues here and find out whether, for instance, ensuring the conditions for being compliant, is that a matter of safety 1, or is it a matter of safety 2? Is that a health-creating business, or is it a disease-avoiding business? Because somebody have to, in tacit, so to say, ensure that the conditions for following the rules are there. But if not, because if not, somebody have to break them. That could be also a part of resilience. We don't have time to go into this, but this is the kind of setup that makes it possible to make the distinctions and to decide whether should we go left or right on this issue. Could we take an issue here and develop more into resilience, or should just kind of ensure that it's part of the compliance regime? It's a choice that we can get on this.
Can I make a question? Do you have these conditions to ensure that you follow the procedures at the same time to know what is the limit of the procedures to be flexible? Is what you are talking in this.
That will be part of that discussion for that specific context. There is nothing normative about this. Just example, threads that you can kind of try to follow for your in a specific situation. But the thing is, you can use it to try to sort out all the issues here, the things that we see that can be developed this way into something more. Can an organization do something more about this, what we found here, and kind of check out what this kind of organization do? What is it about the workplace that can contribute to this to happen? Or is it just what we have done before, ensure that it's not failing? That's a choice that we can make based on these methods. How are we doing in terms of time? So, now I've lost the colors. You have to excuse me, this should be red and that should be blue. Here is the compliance, as you said. And there's a small figure in the middle that taken from James Reason's book, which he points out the tendency of rules being more and more narrow, so the chances that people have to break them increases. So this is part of the same game. Point here, we're seeking reconciliations between resilience and compliance, is that complexity is a key issue, is used in many meanings here. We can talk about interactive complexity, we can talk about the interactability of a kind of function. We can talk about complexity that is nothing more than complicatedness. And we can talk about sensitivity to initial conditions in terms of chaos theory and things like that. All this justifies resilience per se. But if you're taking the complexity argument a bit longer, farther, that is, if you're thinking of complexity in socio-technical systems, in organizational systems, if you're trying to make sense of complexity, not just along an axis of function and definition and closure in order to kind of eradicate it from the system, instead of talking about complexity as something that we try to understand along an axis of meaning related to diversity, to change, to rupture, to variability, to surprise, that is another type of complexity that we're talking about. Not the engineering type of complexity, but the MTO, I almost call it the monster complexity. It is, for instance, John Law in related to active network theory, he called these systems for heterogeneous monsters because they are not coherent. They're able to engineer them into coherence. There are many things at the same time. They can surprise them in many ways. And if you take that kind of complexity into account, that is the kind of complexity that is able to, so to say, invent black swans. Let me use one example, Macondo accident, not an incident. In the latest book by Andrew Hopkins, among other things, he points at the fact that the drilling crew were actually finishing off the operation before they were finished, mentally. They did not react to the signs from the well, from the pressure test, from the well. They were finalizing. They were able to kind of shut off, finalize before they were finished. They were in another place. The organizations are able to do that. They are able to create their own black swans. And that is something that we have to consider. It's not enough to say that we know that this can happen, know that this can happen, and so on, and install controls at each place. The organization might forget still. And this kind of complexity is what kind of conditions the balances between resilience and compliance. A successive set of balances that have to be reformulated from time to time. You can find one type of reconciliation that works now, it doesn't have to work tomorrow. You have to look at the balance. You have to, so to say, follow the rule, not in a literal term of following what the rule says, but we have to follow how the rule functions in its context. So from there you can, this is taken from another work, but it leads to kind of a threefold focus here, saying we have to resist what we know can happen, we have to cope with what we are not expecting, and we are going to shape the balance between those two approaches. For that we need some other approaches to safety management too. It's not enough to talk about risk and decision, that we can decide this from time to time. We have to actually take into account that the organization is encountering risk in another way. This is a very good reference to a very good book by Michael Power and Richard Hunter called Organizational Encounter with Risk. And And they focused on 3 pillars, which deviates from the standard risk management approaches of risk decision. They're talking about organizational attention. How is the enterprise, the business, actually organize its limited capacity to attend to things? Is it stuck in the same pattern of observation attention, or is it changing? Again, returning to Macondo, to the horizon, the top brass of EP and the drilling operator was on the platform. They were celebrating or kind of doing a kind of routine operation in order to celebrate that the Macondo rig had, the deep water horizon rig had a long time of operation without losses or without injury. So they're actually about to copy the safety approach of that rig to other rigs in that system. The attention was elsewhere. The attention was not on the actual accident that was developing under their feet. Despite that many of these people were professional drillers. They know what this was about. So they had their attention elsewhere. So they were not able to kind of couple the individual sensor making and institutional sensor making processes. They were not able to remake the organizations and change. The 5th step in this LIGO approach is addressing adaptive traps. The basic message is very simple. Each unique organization should have some stock criteria for resilient practices. This is very much based on the reaction from a former drill manager in Statoil in Norway, which is now head of a big operation in northern Norway. He said, we showed him this approach, tried to kind of sell it. And it was very positive, but he said, there must be some stock criteria. And he gave us some stories about people that had gone too far in being resilient, although they didn't know the term. They were too adaptive. So that said, this is fine, but we have to stop some from time to time. This we can base on these patterns of adaptive breakdowns that put down on the root cell this graph. Okay, closing in now for my views on the matter. To say that from a risk management and safety management point of view, this poses some special challenges because the risk management, the sun is shining on the compliance side of this step. Here's the contextual shadow, so to say. Here's the sun shining in terms of attention from the safety management system, which picks up new things and puts them into the system, updates the rules, and so on. Put into a management framework that absorbs these new issues, these techniques and practices, a plan, do, check, act approach that fits very well with this total quality management way of thinking. Continuous improvement all the time. That is the imperative. But at the same time, they indicate here that it might be necessary to take a walk on this downside also from time to time. I'm not saying that you should walk here instead of here, but the walk have to be more rugged, have to be kind of visiting these dark spots from time to time, and then trying to returning to the sunny side. Because if you kind of pretend that you are very safe and you just go on walking here and then suddenly rushing to this side, then you know maybe it's not capable to actually do that. And I place these metaphors of pathogenesis and solidogenesis on the top. I'm probably the only one in the large community that's talking about these metaphors. But I intend to do that for a while yet, because I think it's worthwhile to say that resilience is something more, maybe something more, than it's just the absence of failure. Maybe it's organizational health, something more than the absence of organizational disease. So, for this rugged walk, it's not necessary to think in risk and decision as we always do. Have been doing. Resilience demands other decisions, other decision makers, It challenges and reach the grasp and durability of the decisions. You can decide as much as you want, but how long do they last in these circumstances? So there is a tendency in risk management, for instance, that you cannot address a kind of hypothetical decision maker that does not exist in the organization. You so to say conjure up a kind of artificial supreme point that can decide everything. But most decision makers are actually working within more confined context. So you can use this hunting high and low metaphor if you want, which means that you encounter risk on the way. You have to rethink. You have to remake your organizational attempt. You have to make sense of things in other ways than you did before, not using the same scheme all the time. This can be a more rugged walk than just having the TPM approach of continuous improvement. That might be one of the implications, at least, of thinking compliance and resilience together. I will talk much more tomorrow about to rule or not to rule, and go into more the dialectical and shaping relation between compliance and resilience. But I leave that for tomorrow. So then I just hope that we can have some more discussion on what has been presented. Otherwise, we just close the workshop. Maybe you're tired too.
How do you discuss this with the authorities? Because they are pretty rule-based. How do you have any experience how you can discuss this with the authorities or any?
Yeah. It is. I can go back to my text here, but I think. Get the same reaction there too. That when we're discussing the matter, they see this kind of, and this theory of that's actually been well received in some circumstances that we have to go on both sides. But when it comes to reliability, can you trust this? That is the more do this. So it requires that we kind of accept that there is a more rugged walk. So to say, prescribing. You have to kind of leave the comfort of this deep structure, of this institutionalized view. I'll say, so I don't think it's the authorities that will be the first mover in that respect. I think that the first move is to kind of have the industry and the practitioners to try it out in a kind of controlled way. And I think it's maybe it's a paradox. It might not be the people at the floor that actually are the front runners in this too, because they are so exposed to the risk that they want to feel the assurance, so to say, on the rules. Might be true. But I think, put it all the way around, if resilience shall play a role, is there an alternative than kind of positioning it as a complement to compliance? I believe that there's not. I do not think that it is fruitful to say compliance or resilience. It's your choice. So if resilience shall have an impact, a kind of way into implementation, it has to be related to compliance in some way or other. And this is a kind of proposition of how that might be. I'm just sure about one thing, it won't be exactly like this. But can we kind of take a kind of voting on that? Is resilience good enough, strong enough for so that we can, so to say, substitute compliance? Right? Do we have to go for some kind of coexistence of mutual development? I should maybe say that at the resilience engineering conference.
I think a mutual development is more or less inevitable, because we've seen this kind of discussions over the past 25, 30 years, also with quantitative risk assessment versus safety management systems versus other scientific notions. But I think dealing with both extremes, as you position them, is absolutely necessary. Because, for instance, in the aviation industry, we see a lot of high-tech devices which require more or less a very strict compliance to engine setting, power supply, altitude, attitude, whatever. And all these parameters are very critical and very safety critical for a flight performance. So compliance will be an inevitable and pivotal situation in, for instance, high-tech systems. Same comes, hopefully, for process industry and nuclear power plants, because this technological component has its own rules of rationales. And it's the interference between man, machine, and organization that counts in this respect, which makes it also more or less domain-specific, I think.
I think the dialectical setting that you are creating is a sort of illegal, I would maybe say syntax error or something like that. Because I think the different types of concepts that you are putting opposite to each other. Why I think that resilience is a description of system performance, and compliance is a kind of adjustments on how performance is executed, comparing two things, and therefore putting them opposite to each other. I don't see it as a sort of a legal opposition. So that would be my reaction to your question.
The point
Can I enforce the comment?
Okay.
Because it's about the same thing. I think I agree with the gentleman. I had a problem with the names that you're using. I'm very well acquainted with your thinking, but I think, first of all, the term compliance is not at the same level as the term resilience. I would restate it, if you permit me, into rule following or adaptive behavior. I would contrast these two. I would not choose the two names, put them in a dialectic relationship, the compliance versus resilience. And I have another question for you. What makes the difference between compliance and rule following for you? This is very critical.
Yeah, I see that, as I said, compliance can be much less rigid than a rule following. But it's an expression of the same way of thinking. And I think that resilience thinking is actually challenging those premises. So, no matter how kind of flexible you are making the rules, you are still rule-centric, you are still relying on those rules. You are feeling assurance, seeking assurance in the rule. So, I actually at least said the proposition that resilience thinking is a kind of so radical alternative to that it's actually fruitful to make the distinction visible and say that the dialectical process is not a problem, that it's a kind of a producer of solutions, or finding the right balances. But I'm taking, so to say, maybe too literally, and I'm taking on a way, in a way, resilience on its own words. On this theory, W theory, set of explaining why the systems do not fail. Two radically different approaches. So I so to say try to see that these are embedded in what he's talking about. And ask the question, what should we do with that? Because saying that the resilience is just a kind of better version of compliance or rule following. Well, okay, what's the difference? What's the big deal ever with the resilience? I'm trying to provoke you into that, and unfortunately you didn't answer me. That's good.
I was really happy that you said that people like the rules, people need the rules, and everybody who has real connection with industry knows them. And also sometimes, from our perspective, because we've seen that in air maintenance, is that sometimes people use the rules, manipulate the rules, to become adaptive in management decisions. So it's a lot more complex than using the rules or being adaptive, because sometimes people try to use the rules in the shop floor to be adaptive into crazy management decisions. Pressures of cost, pressures of schedule. So it's, that's why I think that the relationship is more complex than just opposite views. Have you seen that in the oil industry? Because people like the rules for many reasons.
Yeah, they do. And I was trying not to advocate that. I was trying to kind of make a kind of stretch here. But I'm not saying that resilience should replace rules. But I actually say that it's possible to interpret the discourse on resilience so far as that being the case, and that you have the kind of choice, resilient or not. So my point is that you should see them together. They are infiltrated, but in order to understand this extra on its own terms, it might be useful to use the distinction that I used as kind of contrast fluid to see it. But again, as in medicine, the doctors, they use contrast fluid in order to spot the difference. That is, they don't see in you ordinary circumstances. They don't use the contrast fluid to treat the patient. It's not medicine. It's only a technique that we use to spot the difference. Oh, there's a difference. What can I do then? Then you proceed. I'm using it as a contrast fluid in order to see the difference. And then ask, what can we do? Is resilience only a matter of personal qualification, or being very skilled so that I can use the rules in a very safe way? But you're demoing, you're putting resilience on the shoulder of the individual. And that might be a heavy word saying, you should be resilient. You should be so clever that you are resilient. We as an organization shouldn't do anything about resilience. You have the problem. You have the responsibility. I'm saying the opposite. If the organization means something about resilience, should actually facilitate the same way as it facilitates the absence of them. That's the kind of challenge or the provocation I'm trying.
But you asked the question of how it's offshore. I just have been a few times offshore, but when you are going to do a maintenance operation, you have your procedures, and then you go, the technicians go and do these talk walks, so to discuss how the work has to be performed in that site, and then you use the procedures as one of the tools to carry out the work. So that's the way that I did when I was out.
How about if, for example, a tool is missing and they need to perform that by tomorrow morning? Proposal then. Do you go on or you stop? What we've seen is that people, they don't stop. And it's not for their burden, because this is burdening them, but they don't stop because they have heavy pressure from them.
And that was all my personal. So that organization has no facilitated for that. And it's a very big difference between maintenance and drilling, for instance. Drilling is kind of very uncertain business. You don't know what to hit. There's a famous story in Norway. In Norway, decades ago, we had the first blowout. The Norwegian industry did not know what to do. What do we do now? It's oil is running. They called in two Texans, Redadera and Luke Hansen. They were famous, they were legends. They came over and they went on the drill and then started to kind of strangle this. And then the Norwegian press was then trying to get on hold of all them, and they managed to get an interview and asked Luke Hansen, well, how is it going? And his answer was just, I don't know, it's dark out there. It's dark. I don't know what's happening. It's no model. You have to kind of act on it and see what happens. So there are many extremes there, so to say. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to be normative in any sense. I'm just raising some possibilities that we should maybe, if you're talking about resilience as something else, then we maybe should take it more seriously, go a bit further, and then be aware that we cannot drive it too far. We have to find a kind of reconciliation. How resilient do we want to be?
In any case, there's also the case that organizations are resilient in practice, but they don't know that in their papers. Meaning, I mean, everybody here knows the story with the traffic control. If you totally follow the rules, the system will break apart. That happens in our maintenance also. If people that work overnight in maintenance fully follow the rules, the thing breaks down. So they do apply adaptive practices, but the organization does not want to learn how to do it.
It's behind the rational facade.
Exactly.
So I think that's a meaningful term too. The organization maintain a rational facade of compliance. We are in control. Oh yeah, we will revise our rules. We have control. But something is happening behind. And should people be left alone in doing the things that behind the facade? Because that's a matter of decency, actually.
You're talking about air traffic control. In CESA, these green projects, then we have this coexistence. We try to have this coexistence now because we are trying to do this static risk analysis, and then we have this resilience, addressing resilience as well, and try to have this coexistence. And so it's not that there is the one or the other one. We have can coexist because both will have the system to operate. So I'm
Okay, so on the more aspect is what the rules, what is the meaning of the rule? Is the rule defining a minimum? A social agreement where we say separation between two aircraft is 300 miles, full stop. Beyond that, we don't accept. That's the social agreement. When we go beyond that, we have an issue. Because from experience, we know how go wrong. We don't accept it. And to be resilient, we say, okay, 290, still okay. We call it EMS, make it detected. Then we have to understand why 290 was fine in that circumstance. Because it was wind at that particular so we have an environmental issue here. In drilling, we have storm. You know, at a certain level of waves, you stop drilling because by experience, it's too dangerous for various reasons. So I think another path in this concept might be helpful to view what the rules, what is the meaning of the rule in what context.
But taking that example of the riser and some of the movements, they actually were performing, I can say rather, some years ago with a water company, a kind of workshop related to such an incident, where they were at that age. There were two different opinions in the company. Should I have cut it, or was it right to continue? And we managed to actually have a fruitful discussion in which both judgments were allowed to come up. And there were quite different conceptions of what was going on. Should we have stopped it because we did not stop or something? Actually, you can conceive to make sense of the same incident in very different ways within the same conception.
In the oil industry, there is one particular example in the 1980s, Hyper Alpha. When the rig shut down, Hyper Alpha went down. Just a thing which out of fuel, so
Fuel the
fire. And in that sense, because one of the room operators stick to the rule and asking the central control room, can I shut down, please?
You find those examples.
Yeah. In that sense, I mean, what is the sense of the rule? And the rule gave the person on site the right, in a HRO type of organization, to say stop. Don't bring in afterwards if it's not in the sense of the decision maker's view.
an example, this kind of dynamic around this rational facade. Absolutely. What's going on?
Yeah, I think there's also a distinction between the level at which rules should be complied with. For instance, in aviation, we have a global network that's set 24 bases, and it's absolutely impossible to negotiate whether you will have a separation distance of 300 miles in one situation and 200 in another part of the world, or depending on the weather conditions, again, another kind of standard. So it depends all on the level of the system, whether it's the sectoral level, or it's a national level, or a company level. And you cannot afford yourself to have too many deviations from rules which adhere to safety on the global network level. And that makes aviation, for instance, quite different from a process industry. And we should take that into account as well, because these cultural phenomena also play a very important role in that respect. For instance, in Singapore, somebody wants to burn down the forest and suffocate their neighbors. That's not done in Europe so far. But the standards, the norms, the cultures in the world are quite different. And we also have more or less rigid rules to comply with from a technological point of view or a sectoral interest point of view. So I'm not against rules, but I'm not for resilience under any condition as well.
I take my discussion on the very generic level, not very abstract level. But it's, I hope that the point was trying to make was kind of received, and I mean, maybe think over it. That's, I have no answers, there are nothing normative in this presentation. But I think it's worthwhile to think over. Is there a rational facade for which something is going on behind? Actually deserves to be looked at. And is there differences in logics, so to speak? Okay? We won't reach the final answer, so we can close the motion. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.